Well, hi, my name is Bronte Price. I'm the founder of the Equality Network, and welcome to another Safe Space Chat. Today I'm joined by Jimmy, a trans man, and for many of us, we cruise through life pretty smoothly. We don't really think about the milestones that confront us at different phases of our life. And for many of us, life just happens. But for many members of the LGBTIQ plus community, life and those phases isn't quite so smooth. Sometimes those milestones can be like big boulders that they've either got to travel around or climb over the top of. And so this Safe Space Chat explores how some of those milestones in a couple of the phases of our lives can be different or pretty much the same for LGBTIQ plus people as for cis hetero people. And so, Jimmy, let's start by just having a broad conversation about that phase of life called early childhood. What was it like for you as Jimmy?
Um,
And
so
as
I feel like yeah, I always felt quite different to the majority of other kids as a young person. Um, and I think I never really dug too deep into it. I mean, maybe now that I'm talking about it, I'm kind of reflecting on the fly. But I did feel like it was hard for me to relate to a lot of other kids my age. I would kind of watch them and see how they just kind of fit into their little, I don't know, niche little neat parcels, I guess. And I'll be like, why do I feel like I'm kind of a big mishmash of random things? Um, so I actually struggled to make friends kind of in the first few years of primary school.
yeah,
And I think that's when I really noticed that I wasn't one of the girls.
yeah,
Um, so I used to avoid hanging out with the girls and I would go play with the boys. And it was really interesting because actually the other kids in kindergarten would treat me like one of the boys.
yeah.
So when we play like kiss and catch, I was never on the girls' team. I was always on the boys' team. Um, so I don't know. That was kind of cool, I guess. But yeah, so I felt definitely different. Um, but like I was mentioning to you before, that's something that I always noticed in my early childhood that didn't seem like it was happening to everybody else was I would get really, really distressed about being put in like feminine clothing. And then on top of that, if my mum wanted to like take photos of me or whatever, I would just have this full on meltdown and I just couldn't handle it. And right up until very recently, I've always really struggled to have my photo taken because I never felt like it reflected who I truly was. Um, and I think another thing was looking in my reflection. Um, I would always be so surprised by what I saw when I'd look in the mirror. Because in my mind's eye, I think I always look like some version of this.
Yeah.
And so I'd look in the mirror and be like, oh, like it was
Yeah.
really jarring for me.
Yeah. And that was, of course, several times a day, or at least a daily occurrence, as you brush your teeth or do your hair, I guess. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
reminder.
And I think, like, as such a young person, to be so fixated on the way that I
Mm.
looked,
Yeah.
I don't like, I know kids these days can be quite self conscious and all, but like, I was very, very fixated on it and I felt like physically repulsive. I
Yeah.
always felt so hideous as a young kid. So I don't know if that would reflect the majority of
Yeah.
cis people.
Okay. Thanks. And was there any response around that by any of your teachers, say in primary school or later primary school? Or was it not an
In
issue?
regards to what
This,
aspect?
yeah, this aspect of you feeling like you didn't fit in, that you were more of a boy than response to that?
Um, I don't remember the teachers ever having too much to say to me about it. I think um, I was never a kid that was like suffering and feeling isolated and not knowing how to give myself what I need. I think I was always an outlier, but a very independent, strong outlier. So I don't think that there was like concern for me by my teachers or my parents. I was always just a little bit left of center. Like that's just how I've always been.
Yeah.
But I do remember that the kids in my year would ask me, like, "Are you going to get a sex change?" And I remember saying, "I don't know." Like I just always had just felt this way. And I think at least my contemporaries could see it and feel it. I don't know whether the adults around me could or not.
And that's just how kids are, isn't it? Just so straight to the core, cut
Yeah.
and just ask those questions because there's no malice behind that. It's simply
No,
curiosity.
curiosity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
So let's talk about teenage, and we're going to talk about um, a range of milestones that most kids would kind of go through, hit
Mm.
as you go through teenage and then early 20s. And so that's the kind of area of life, phase of life that we'd like to look at, I think. So sometime in the first few years of teenage, typically you go through some pretty marked physical changes
Oh
that are
yeah.
obvious and, known to every person who's ever been through teenage. Did that
Yeah.
occur for you in a similar way, do you think, that it would for a cis person, or was it pretty different?
Um, I did feel quite distressed about going through puberty. For me, it happened really young. I was in primary school.
Yeah.
So I got my period, I think, in year five.
Yeah.
And like, I was just like, no, 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 no. This cannot be happening to me. Like, I just, I hated it. And I felt like it was shameful and disgusting. And it really bothered me. And then, like growing breasts and everything, that really got me. I did not like that at all because that was something that was, visual for everybody else to see. At least with like having a period, it was just I knew,
Yeah.
you know. Um, but I think I was always worried about how other people were perceiving me. Um, and it was changes that were outside of my control, like that I really didn't want.
Yeah.
So it was a combination of it making me feel dysphoric, but also because I was like quite young and nobody else around me was experiencing it, I was like, oh, like I didn't like it at all. Um, and I don't know if other people get excited by it. For me, it was just, I guess it was one of those first moments where I really started to see like boys and girls
Yeah.
separating, because as young kids, we kind of all just whatever. We're a little bit genderless, I feel.
Yeah.
But this is where things started to kind of really take a detour from what I saw for myself. Um, so yeah, it
Yeah.
was
They're
just
some of
traumatic.
the first markers, aren't they, of gender into
Yeah.
um, what you know to be. How is the first day at high school for you? Were there any changes for you um, between primary school, where, as you said, kids are kids, and there's not much kind of kids don't see difference in that way.
Mm,
They don't see differences in colour, for example, or race.
mm,
Um,
mm,
so I just wonder if that changed when you got to high school for the first few years of high school.
mhm. I think by that point I had really taken note that of what the majority of other girls were doing.
Yeah.
So I think I flew under the radar a bit because, like I said, I've always been really concerned with how everybody else perceives me. So I've always been very calculated, filtered, edited. I curate this, you know, identity that everybody else sees, because I don't want to stick out like a sore thumb. So, you know, after going through puberty, that influenced the kind of clothes that I would wear. So I used to be very androgynous as a young kid. And then I was like, okay, well, now I've got this body. I don't want to necessarily be this like really butch looking kind of girl. So I actually dressed more feminine. And I hung around with big groups of girls, and like, yeah, they could feel the vibe of me was different. I think a lot of girls still responded to me as if I was a boy. And I know that some of them maybe were confused by me, because I think people found themselves attracted to me that couldn't understand why. And then they would like hide that. And that is not a nice feeling, you know? But yeah, in general, I think for the first few years of high school, actually for all of high school, I really kind of tried to conform to what was like within the realms of like normal for a teenage girl. At least visually, you know.
So that involved the usual kind of. I take the point that you were your presentation, your gender expression was pretty androgynous, but did it involve kind of experimenting with makeup and?
Yeah, like I would wear makeup. I mean, even until my 20s, I had hair like down to here, like long wavy hair, which didn't bother me. I really loved having long hair. But yeah, like definitely dabbled with the makeup. Kind of more around the age of like 16 and up, I would start wearing more dresses and, you know, just quite feminine things. And I started getting like a lot of attention from like 16 to like 18, 19, from guys. And, you know, and I would entertain that idea, went kind of on a few dates, but I was never really that interested. Boys are dumb. But yeah, like I really tried. I tried so hard to be a girl. And I think for those years, I kind of almost had forgotten a little bit about how I truly felt. Because I was so wrapped up in what I thought I should be. You know, I just wanted to feel beautiful. Because I'd never felt beautiful in my whole life. And then like I turned like 16, and because I was quite chubby as a kid and as a teenager. But when I turned 16, like I became vegetarian, I started losing all this weight. You know, I'd gone through puberty. I looked pretty, like, and so that was like an incentive for me. I was like, I feel beautiful only because other people were perceiving me as beautiful. You know, and
I guess you were getting some attraction from the boys as well.
Yeah.
Pretty good for the ego, right?
Of course. And like to this day, I still get a little bit distracted by that sometimes, because I still get a lot of attention from guys. And even though like I can't really see myself dating a man, but I still like, I don't know, it just, maybe it's affirming now, because I'm like, if gay guys like me, like, wow, that must be, you know. But yeah, so I was always really dependent upon like other people's perception of me, because internally I couldn't like make myself believe it that I was beautiful.
So you had to rely on others' interpretation of that and that affirming stuff. From them. I want to go to getting your first. Did you have a part-time job during teenage?
Yeah, I used to kind of dabble like with teaching, like tutoring I used to tutor disadvantaged kids at a local community center.
Yep.
And I'd teach music, but in a very like casual capacity.
Yep.
I've actually always really struggled with holding down a job.
Yep.
I haven't lasted in the job for I think the longest time I had worked in the same place was a few years, and that was when I was working with my dad.
Yeah.
But apart from that, I just get very anxious and overwhelmed, especially when I was transitioning.
Yeah.
But as a teenager, like the first jobs that I had, I think I wasn't focused too much on my gender presentation at that time. I think I was just running with the femme thing.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, I was okay, like I could do it, you know. But yeah, definitely moving beyond then, I stopped working completely because I was like, I can't, how can I get a job?
Yep.
I am an in-between freak, which, and I'm saying that thinking about myself,
Yep.
I'm not to call, you know, non-binary people that, but that's how I felt. I was like, people aren't going to know how to talk to me. People will be nervous to engage with me because they don't know what to say or how to take me, and I hate awkwardness and cringiness, you know. I love things to have flow.
And so the solution to that at that stage was to just not have a job, not apply for a job, because it was an easier way to proceed,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. And so I was on Centrelink while I was studying, and that was hard. I had like no money. I actually had a really beautiful partner at the time who really like financially supported me through those first few years of transition.
Yeah.
And yeah, kind of like after a couple of years of social transitioning, then I finally landed a job teaching.
Yeah.
But you know, I had to keep like reasserting, this is who I am, you know.
Yeah.
And I felt like an idiot because I was like, I'm here standing up in front of a class of like toddlers and their parents, being like, you know, I'm Jimmy, I'm a male teacher, and I just didn't feel it like I was convincing enough. So to have to do that every week, it was just exhausting, you know. Um, so yeah, I quit that job too.
So was that a part-time job or a full-time job?
It was only part time, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So that's just completely draining, I would think, on your mental health. Like every minute of every day that you're at work, you've got to go through that struggle, I would think. Is that?
Oh, it's exhausting,
Yeah.
honestly. Like, and I was struggling really bad with like drugs and alcohol at the time. You know, like yeah, I don't know. I was a hot mess,
Yeah.
and I don't think I would let myself feel the enormity of like what I was experiencing at the time,
Yeah.
because I think like I touched on the other week, for me it was like survive.
Yeah.
If I take any time to like reflect and go, this is really hard, I can't do it, la 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 la, I was like, I'm going to lose my momentum. Just keep going. Just keep going. Okay, if it's too much, okay, no, take that one out. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Find something else that fits better. It was just take a step, you know?
Yeah. So at that age, what age were you when you were having some issues with drugs and alcohol?
Pretty much it started when I was like 16.
Yeah.
And then I mean, even now, like I have to be really careful with my personal boundaries because I have really bad impulse control.
Yeah.
And I just got to a point where I was like, you're going to end up in jail or dead or killing somebody else.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I had to have a few moments of like, you know, good reckoning with myself, and my close friends talking to me and being like, yo, this, you can't do this.
Uh,
I damaged and hurt a lot of people and relationships, and I was just sabotaging myself constantly.
yeah.
And it's only been in the last couple of years, like I didn't drink alcohol because that was a big one for me. The alcohol really just switched off any common sense in my brain, and that's when a lot of the bad stuff would happen. So I didn't drink for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And recently I have a bit of wine every now and then, but I have a limit.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't get into trouble anymore. I'm not doing things that
Yeah.
I think my brain's fully developed now that I'm 30, but
Well, and it's probably lots clearer, less foggy.
oh yeah, because it's just I've created a life for myself where there's stability, and
Yeah.
I learned a lot of hard lessons young
Yeah.
because I'm trans.
Yeah.
Um, so I think I have the toolkit now to deal with the emotions that I have that still come with it all.
Yeah.
And I've been in therapy for a really long time. But it's just, for me, it's like it's a choice every day. Like, I choose me and I choose life, and I have so much to give to the world, and I have so much that I would love to receive from the world. So I want to be better.
Yeah.
I don't want to settle for a life that's half lived.
No. No. And so in that time from say age 16 onwards for a few years, it sounds like you referred to some really close friends. It sounds like you had a pretty solid support network around you. Is that right? Or was it kind of,
Yeah,
yeah,
I've had like majority the same friends since I was like 12,
yeah,
and like I still live with one of them. I can't get rid of him. And those boys from one of my groups at high school, like, yeah, a handful of them,
yeah,
they're family to me. And they see me through there's only a handful of people now really that know me from before I transitioned.
yeah,
Um, but like, yeah, they just came along the journey with me, supported me. And I supported them. I think they always turn to me for advice for a lot of things because I don't know, I feel like trans people become this like big mediator and sage wise person for everybody else around them. So yeah.
So one of the things that happens during teenage, I think, generally, is that we experiment with different groups. We go in and out of friendship groups, and it becomes quite competitive and nasty, and there's all sorts of bullying and stuff that happens. But it sounds like you've got this core of really solid friends that you've maintained and have still
Yeah.
got, right?
Yeah. I'm
Yeah,
like
right.
super lucky.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the other things that happens in teenage is that we tend to, most of us would still be living at home. One of the hallmarks of being a teenager, I think, is having the occasional fight with the parentals.
Mm.
How is that? What happened with you? Did you live at home for much of your teenage years, or?
I lived with my mum until I was 18.
Yeah,
I was always a very cool, calm, and collected, like just always poker face.
yeah,
I really chose my battles with my parents. I always had a deep respect for them. But also, my mum and I, like, kind of in a way, co parented my younger sister. Um, so I felt that in my mum's household, even though I was very much the child,
yeah,
uh, I was treated with a certain respect
yeah,
for my ideas and my opinions and beliefs. Um, so if my mum and I did fight, it was usually from the age of 16 up, and it was about lifestyle choices
yeah,
because my mum is a very by the book, Catholic, like perfect Italian kind of, you can picture it. Like, she's just very by the book. And I'm really not. And I get into trouble a lot, but the extent of the trouble I was getting in, it was never realized by my parents,
Yeah.
because I always felt like I lived a double life,
Yeah.
where I was exactly who I needed to be at home to keep things calm, run smooth. And then I was a mess everywhere else that was away from my family. And even now, I don't like to mix like my friends and my family too much, because it's like drastically different versions of me. Um, because I am known for being very spontaneous, very impulsive, not thinking of consequences. Whereas at home, I would be described as, quite responsible, knows my sense of obligation to my family, and reliable, and all those things,
Compliant, perhaps.
Yeah.
So,
And always a bit in the background, just letting other people have it out
yeah, yeah.
and being the mediator. That's the role I played
Ah,
at home.
okay. So kind of like a chameleon, where you
Ah,
according to what's required in different situations, and you can flick it on and flick it off.
absolutely. That's exactly how I would describe myself. Um, and it's a safety thing, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
I know who I am, and I know my biggest, fullest version of myself.
yeah,
But if it's not going to be received in the way that I want it to be,
yeah,
this kind of ties in with the trans stuff too, right? It's
yeah,
like, do I want to fly under the radar here? Yes, I do, because it's safer for me. I'm not going to get attention put on me. I'm not going to get scrutinized, criticized, all this kind of stuff. So I've always like kind of played a bit of a game,
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Understand. Thanks. So post high school, you finished. You went right through high school, correct?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then you headed to university. Tell me how you found the kind of looser, I guess, the freer, the more independent vibe that we have associated in our minds, I think, with universities compared with the pretty structured kind of learning, even social learning that goes on at school. How was
Yeah.
that for you? And tell us a bit about what you studied at uni as well.
Sure. So I studied music, so creative, and I also studied education. Um, when I went to uni, I moved out of my mum's house. I moved to Sydney, and I lived with my dad.
Yeah,
Um, I didn't really know my dad that well, so I was kind of getting to know him as a person. He was very much like a housemate. I'd never been disciplined by my dad ever in my life that I can think of,
yeah,
because he just wasn't around. So it was like two people just living with each other. He was really depressed, and I would describe him as an alcoholic. So he was just drinking every day and passing out on the couch, and I just come and go as I please. So I just turned 18. I've basically been thrown out into the world. I'm living with a parent who
yeah,
is completely absent.
yeah,
So, and I'm going to uni where there's not that much structure.
yeah,
And to be honest, I absolutely just went off the rails.
yeah,
I had all of this freedom, all of this awful pain that I was carrying, and I just basically exploded everywhere. And I was partying all the time. I wasn't eating. I became really fixated on like starving myself and like dropping as much weight as I could. Um, and like my dad's just not noticing anything because,
yeah,
well, he's drunk all the time. So I had free reign. I just didn't have the tools to deal with basically being let out to run free in the world. I started failing uni. I never really went. I was always in the counselor's office. I had to go and do a bunch of like what they called like psychiatric assessments, all this
yeah,
kind of stuff. Like I felt like I lost my mind. Like I was so paranoid, and I guess what I would call like stress induced psychosis. Like I was hallucinating. I thought people were coming after me. Like it was a really, really bad time.
yeah,
But at the same time, I was performing like interstate, like living a real I don't know, rock and roll kind of lifestyle. I was doing really well in my singing because I did classical voice and I had an amazing teacher. Like, so it was like I'm high functioning, I'm getting all my shit done, but then also like not because now you're really not making it to uni. Like you're not feeding yourself. Like, I would stop showering. I just
Yeah.
it was a mess.
Yeah. So what what happened to turn that around? So you had all this freedom and independence, but you weren't taking the responsibility. So what happened to change all that?
um it was a gradual thing over
Yeah.
time. I mean, there were just moments,
Yeah.
like I was so far gone. Like especially in my intimate relationships, I was cheating all the time. And I don't know, I had no remorse. I was like manic all the time. Nothing was registering. And then I remember being at the beach one day and I just had this like really intense moment of like, if the 10-year-old version of me could see me now, like they would be devastated because all I was doing was just hurting people, and I was hurting myself. And like that was a really sobering thought for me. It was like the first time that I'd really reflected on like who I was becoming. Um, and I understood that like, you know, you are this way because of all the things that you're feeling inside. And at the time I couldn't fully divulge them even to myself. It was too much for me to handle. Um, but I knew that I was like kind of letting myself go down that path. Like it's a choice, yeah.
Yep.
And so I was like, I don't want to be that person.
Yep.
I want to bring joy and love and light into this world. So I need to make decisions that like reflect that. Like I need to do things that align with what I value.
Yep.
But I had that moment and then I felt inspired for a bit. And yeah, I had a new level of, I guess, consciousness and awareness about it, but I still fell back into my old patterns.
Of course.
And I kept doing it.
Yep.
And even now, like I am so much better and I'm really proud of who I am and what I bring to the world and to the community and all of that. But I still, it's like it almost feels like this default, like a switch flips and bang, I'm just like back into this. I don't know. It almost doesn't feel like me. It's just like this person who has so much hurt and just
Yep.
wants to feel it and wants others to feel it. And I start using drugs and alcohol again, and I get really, but it's just little moments along the way that have kind of helped me go, oh, it's not worth losing what you have to just sit there in your pain.
Yeah. And is the work that you do with your therapist and your chosen family, is that kind of key to helping you through those times and to reflect that switch?
Sometimes yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes no. Sometimes it's a real personal thing.
Yeah.
Like I'm the kind of person that even though I'm super social, really bubbly, like I'm never in my room, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes when I'm going through those moments, I just lock myself in my room for like days, and I just stand in front of my mirror and I just like talk to myself, and I pray because I was raised with religion,
Yeah.
and I just try to connect to a grounded version of me,
Yeah.
and feel connected to the world around me, because when I start feeling like that, I feel no connection to anything. And so it's easy to do really hurtful things because you can't feel another person's feelings, or you can't feel remorse. So I'm just like try to reconnect myself to my belief systems and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But definitely like having people there as sounding boards who know me
Yeah.
and know what my patterns are like,
Yeah.
that is really helpful because I can say the awful things that I'm thinking and feeling and not be judged.
Yeah.
and it, some of the power gets taken away once it's out of my mouth. I'm like, oh,
It's true. It's true.
yeah.
Just the point that just the fact that you're actually sharing or saying those words is sometimes enough to help you reflect, I think. So you talked earlier about the fact that it was really hard to hold down a paid job for some time, and so you left, eventually graduated from uni with a degree in music. Is that right?
Yeah.
A degree
Yeah.
in education.
Yeah.
And then how did you get to owning your own business, which is what you're the boss, right now?
Yeah. So,
So,
well, I finished uni and I did my pracs like in
yeah,
the high schools, and
yeah,
that was tough because that was pre-medical transition.
yeah,
But I hated the restrictions I felt that were placed on me in regards to the way that I could teach.
yeah,
I always have a sense of professionalism, but I'm very lax in terms of the way that I talk to people. I like to keep things very like I like to maintain the sense of our humanity. You're not a number. I'm not a robot.
yeah,
Um, I'm going to talk to you as a person,
yeah,
not as a client, or
yeah,
Um, oh, hang on, sorry, what's just happened there? Sorry. Um, and I felt that in schools, I really couldn't do that because I all of a sudden had to be quite uh, stringent in the way that I really set myself as the authority, and the children were beneath me. And I was 21.
yeah,
And a 21-year-old going out to teach up to 18-year-old people, even in um, my pracs, I dealt with a lot of kids who were very inappropriate towards me.
yeah,
And I'm still a kid. I'm 21.
yeah.
And then I have to be the person that maintains the proper boundaries.
That's right.
All right, that's all well and good, but keeping in mind everything I've just told you about, all the drugs, all the alcohol, the impulse control, all of that kind of stuff, I was like, I can't do this job. I think I'm actually going to end up with really big problems if I try to become a teacher now, at least.
Yeah.
So they were the two kind of reasons that I just like can't do it.
Okay.
And so then from there, I what did I do? Oh, that's when I started working for my dad.
Yeah.
And that had its own issues, but I was supported by him through my transition.
Yeah.
My recovery from surgeries. It was easy to talk to him about it because obviously he knew.
Yeah.
Hang on, I just need to plug my phone into charge. It's going to die. 1 second. Might need to change the location to where the charger is. Right, is that working? Cool. So yeah, I started working with him, but then it was hard to deal with the business relationship versus the personal one.
Yeah.
Because the personal one was not that developed.
Yeah.
So any issues that we had in a professional setting really made me feel like it was still there in our personal relationship. So I think I found it really hard. And it was like, this reflects the way that he feels about me as his son.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
There's that messiness in separating the father-son relationship with the employer-employee relationship. What sort of work were you doing with your father?
so we were running an importing and wholesale and retail hand tool company.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
So it was very different to anything I'd ever done before.
Yeah.
But it exposed me to construction because it was selling tools.
Yeah.
So we get a lot of tradies that would come in.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I stayed there for a few years through my first few years of like HRT, so being on testosterone.
Yep.
And so yeah, I guess I started gaining confidence as to like how other people were reacting to me, actually valuing my opinion, especially in that industry.
Yep.
The more masculine I looked and the older I looked, because I looked very young when I first started, I was treated with more respect. And eventually my dad came to a point where, he kind of wanted to wind things down, and I couldn't see myself carrying on the business. So I said, like, no worries, like, I think I'm going to go find a trade. And I looked everywhere to get an apprenticeship as a mature age person.
Yep.
And nobody would really take me on. So I just worked as a casual laborer for years for people. And then I was like, you know what? Like, I'm already working as a carpenter. People are relying on my skill set and just paying me as a casual laborer. And then I got a phone call from a company, the CEO of a company that builds granny flats and stuff. And she was like, I really think our values align. Like, I'd really love to work with you again. Because I worked as a laborer for her. And then she had just called me out of the blue to ask me to be their like site foreman.
Wow.
Yeah. And I was like, I said yes. Because at the time I was getting married, it was going to be good money or better money. And I just had a sense of duty to further my career, even though that's never really been something that's been super important to me. But I was kind of ticking all the like should boxes, you should have the job, you should pay for the wedding, you should this, that, but I said to her, I don't want to be super invested in this. Like, I live in Wollongong, I'm going to be traveling a lot. If it's in Sydney, like, I need you to understand that, like, I have a life outside of this. Basically saying, please don't steamroll me with your business dreams. And anyway, that's what happened. I tried to quit that job multiple times. And she would just talk me out of it with like better conditions and, giving me a little bit of extra attention. And but I was miserable, and I was working my ass off for somebody else's dream. Yeah. And that's a massive burden to bear. Like, to know that I'm the only person who knows your system. You need me. She needed me. Like, so, and I felt I wanted to help her. But I was at the mercy of her organizational skills and her lack of experience in the industry. And, so it made my job really hard. And eventually my relationship broke down. I was like, well, I'm not getting married now anyway. What am I working my ass off for? I went for a walk with one of my Zias, like my auntie, and she said, like, because my family calls me Jam. She's like, Jam, what's your 5-year plan? And I was like, classic WOG thing to ask. What's your 5-year plan? I'm like, here we go. I said, to work for myself and to be in a long-term relationship and own a house. And she's like, well, if you want to work for yourself, why are you working for somebody else? And I was like, oh my God. It's like, you're so right. Like, I could be doing this by myself. Like, I have the skill set. Yeah, it's terrifying because I'm going to have to start from scratch. But then after that, I quit my job. I told my boss, like, no means no. I'm done. I'm sorry. And I stopped responding to her messages trying to get me back. And I took 2 weeks off. And then I just embarked on this journey that has just turned into this crazy successful business. And like, never in my wildest dreams would I have thought that I would be running like a carpentry business with an employee, but it's like,
how long have you been doing that now? How long have you had your own construction business?
It's just gone a year. So
already employing someone.
And like, we made a profit last year, and I don't like working full time. Right? I've always been in and out of jobs. I've always like worked half days or whatever because I need balance, otherwise I just go insane.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, even though we kind of work when we want to, we work hard when we work, but we manage it. We don't, pump it. But we're still, like I'm more than surviving off what I'm doing. So I'm just so grateful, and that so many people like jumped on the bandwagon to like support my business.
Yeah.
My family was definitely like a big supporter. People in the theater community have been really great. And like since the article in the ABC came out, like I got a lot of business from that.
Yes.
Yeah, and like a lot of local recognition, and it's just really beautiful to be able to commit my life to a job that is also kind of changing the world in small ways, you know?
I do. So you need to give your business a plug. Where are you based? What's the name of your business?
Okay, so I decided to call it Nailed It Carpentry because I thought it'd be funny. And we're located in Wollongong.
Yep.
And at the moment, it's just me and one of my best mates who wanted a career change. He was a chef for 10 years and called me up one day and was like, I need to get out, man. I need to do something different. And he's been such a great learner and such a great worker.
Yeah.
We recently took on like a young work experience girl who's 16, like trying to open it up for women and or gender diverse or queer people, where that's kind of part of our business model is like, we are queer and trans tradies for queer and trans people. Yeah,
That's one of the beauties of certainly being your own boss, right? That
absolutely.
you can model that. You can be that business that attracts people who are trans, non-binary, and gender diverse, and use it as a platform that is not only diverse but also inclusive. It's a fantastic model. So
Yeah,
well
yeah, I
done.
think so. Thank
Um,
you. Appreciate it.
I know that in another safe space chat, we're going to talk about Jimmy, the trans man at work. And we've dived in and out of several bits of that conversation already. One of the things around, and I think we'll end on this, is in your 20s and perhaps early 30s, you start to work out what intimacy means compared with being lonely and isolated and alone. Has that been part of your journey? Have you started to do you think, work that sort of stuff out?
Yeah, I've learned a lot about that really recently.
Yeah.
I kind of briefly touched on the fact that I was supposed to be married last year. And like I was with my partner for 5 years or so, so half of my 20s.
Yeah.
But coming out of that, and it was a big deal, 3 months away from my wedding and having to cancel it. So, and like no hard feelings towards her, just want to say that. She chose what she had to for herself, which I definitely admire. But yeah, it just made me stop and think, how do I want to share myself with somebody?
Yeah.
I found it very, very hard to be vulnerable for a really long time. And because of that, I ripped off my partners a little bit, but I also ripped off myself because if you can't be fully there, all of your unpalatable aspects as well, you're not getting the full experience of love. So I really kind of made it my mission to practice being vulnerable. And like I noticed that in my therapy sessions, they became more honest. less vague,
uh,
a bit more specific about things that have hurt me, and even my friends. Like, I don't think, like, my best mate Regan, who's known me since I was 12, I don't think he's ever seen me cry.
yeah,
And I've seen him cry multiple times.
yeah,
I've held him while he's cried, you know. But I'm very, very private with my pain.
yeah,
I can intellectualize it,
yeah.
but when I'm actually experiencing it, I don't like to share it. Um, so yeah, and I think that that all relates to intimacy, right? Like, if you're going to be intimate with somebody, there needs to be an element of vulnerability on both ends. Um, and for the longest time, I always felt so lonely,
Yeah.
because I wasn't sharing my internal world with anybody.
No.
And so then nobody can respond to that part of me. So you are denying that part of yourself to exist, even though it's there. Um, so yeah, I think
Yeah.
definitely this year has been a big year for me, feeling connected to my friends, my family. Um, yeah, just by being honest.
We're really good at putting up shutters, I think, and not letting people see through those. And I think as you said, when you become okay about being vulnerable in a safe way and in a safe place, then the shutters don't get put up as often
Mm,
or as quickly. And
yeah.
those discussions, not only with your therapist, but also with your friends, with your clients, presumably as well,
Oh
become
yeah.
more meaningful, much more authentic, I think, and honest and
Absolutely.
open, much deeper. It's a really good sign of maturity and growth, I think, as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jimmy, for opening up and talking about so many of those milestones that we hit, whether we like it or not, as part of being a teenager and part of being someone in their 20s as a young adult. We look forward to another safe space chat around Jimmy, the trans man at work. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.